Hi, I'm Sarah. Last weekend, I was supposed to be the maid of honor at what everyone called the wedding of the century, but three spoiled brides decided to destroy my life for sport. They humiliated me, excluded me from everything, and had no idea I was hiding the most shocking secret about the groom. What happened next left everyone speechless and changed everything forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now let me take you back to the most devastating and life-changing weekend of my entire existence. I'm Sarah, and 6 months ago, I was living the most complicated double life you could ever imagine. To the world, I was just another small-town girl working at a local flower shop called Petals and Prose, barely making enough to cover rent on my studio apartment above the old bakery on Maple Street. But the truth was so much more complex than anyone could have guessed. I was secretly engaged to Marcus Wellington, the most eligible bachelor in our entire state and heir to the Wellington hotel empire. You might recognize his name from business magazines or society pages, but absolutely nobody knew about our relationship. We had been together for 3 years in complete secrecy, engaged for 8 months, and there was one very specific reason why we kept everything hidden: his social circle. Specifically 3 women who considered themselves the queens of high society and made it their mission to control every aspect of Marcus's life. Victoria Sterling, whose father owned half the commercial real estate in the city. Isabella Crawford, whose family had old money dating back 5 generations and never let anyone forget it. And Madison Vale, the mayor's daughter who treated social events like military campaigns that she had to win at all costs. These 3 women had been Marcus's friends since childhood, and they had very clear ideas about who belonged in their world and who didn't. The moment Marcus started dating someone seriously, they made it their business to investigate and approve or destroy that relationship. They had successfully driven away every woman Marcus had ever cared about, using tactics that ranged from social exclusion to outright sabotage. When Marcus told me about their history, I understood why he wanted to keep our relationship private until we figured out the right way to handle them. He kept saying we needed to be strategic, to find the perfect moment when they couldn't interfere or cause damage. So there I was, living this bizarre, split existence where I spent my days arranging flowers for other people's special moments while secretly planning a future with the man I loved more than life itself. During the week, I worked at the flower shop, learned everything I could about running a business, and saved every penny I earned. Marcus would travel constantly for business, and when he was in town, we would meet at small cafes outside the city or take long walks in parks where nobody would recognize us. I shopped at thrift stores, used coupons at the grocery store, and lived as simply as possible, not because I had to, but because I was terrified of being discovered before we were ready. Victoria, Isabella, and Madison had connections everywhere. They knew people at every upscale restaurant, every boutique, every place where wealthy people gathered. If I had suddenly started living above my means, they would have noticed immediately and started asking questions we weren't ready to answer. Marcus respected my decision to maintain this careful balance, even though it sometimes broke his heart. He would offer to help with my rent, to buy me things, to take me on trips, but I always said no. I was convinced that if we could just wait a little longer and find the right moment to reveal everything, we could build a life together without interference from people who had already decided I wasn't good enough. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was to think that hiding would protect us. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, and when it does, it usually happens at the worst possible moment. That moment came when Marcus's cousin announced her engagement and asked him to be in the wedding party. It was supposed to be a small, intimate ceremony, but somehow Victoria, Isabella, and Madison managed to get themselves involved in every aspect of the planning. They volunteered to be bridesmaids, took over the venue selection, and basically turned someone else's wedding into their own personal showcase. The bride, Rebecca, was sweet but overwhelmed, and she was so grateful for their help that she gave them complete control over everything from the flowers to the guest list. That's when things started to get complicated for me. You see, Marcus needed a date for the wedding. After 3 years of secrecy, he was tired of showing up to family events alone and making excuses about why he wasn't seeing anyone. The wedding was going to be full of relatives asking questions, and he decided this was the perfect opportunity to finally introduce me to his family as his serious girlfriend. He didn't tell Victoria, Isabella, and Madison ahead of time. He knew they would try to interfere, so he planned to simply show up with me and let them deal with the reality of our relationship. It seemed like a reasonable plan, and I was excited about finally stepping out of the shadows and being acknowledged as the woman he loved. I spent weeks preparing for this moment. I saved up money to buy a beautiful dress from a small boutique, not anything too flashy or expensive, but something that made me feel confident and elegant. I practiced conversations in my head, imagining how I would introduce myself to his relatives and what I would say if people asked how we met. Marcus coached me on family dynamics, telling me stories about his aunts and uncles and cousins so I would feel more comfortable. He was so proud to finally be able to show me off, and his excitement was contagious. I felt like we were finally ready to step into our real life together. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at Grandview Manor, an elegant estate outside the city that the Wellington family had used for special occasions for decades. The ceremony would be in the garden, followed by a reception in the main ballroom. It was going to be beautiful and romantic, the perfect setting for our big reveal. But 2 weeks before the wedding, everything started to unravel. Rebecca called me at the flower shop, sounding nervous and apologetic. She explained that she had heard from someone that I was Marcus's girlfriend, and she wanted to invite me to be part of the wedding party. She had been looking for another bridesmaid to balance out the numbers, and she thought it would be perfect to include Marcus's special someone. I was thrilled and touched that she wanted to include me, but I was also nervous about what Victoria, Isabella, and Madison would think. Rebecca assured me that she had already talked to them about it, and they were excited to meet me and include me in all the pre-wedding activities. She gave me the phone number for Victoria, who was apparently coordinating all the bridesmaid preparations. When I called Victoria, her voice was sweet and welcoming. She told me how wonderful it was that Marcus had finally found someone special, and she couldn't wait to get to know me better. She invited me to a bridesmaid's lunch that weekend so we could discuss dress fittings and plan the bachelorette party. Everything seemed perfect, and I felt like maybe I had been worrying about these women for nothing. The lunch was at Chateau Belle, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. I had never been there before, but I dressed carefully in my best business casual outfit and arrived exactly on time. Victoria, Isabella, and Madison were already seated at a corner table, and they greeted me with warm smiles and air kisses like we were old friends. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. They asked me questions about my work, complimented my dress, and shared funny stories about Marcus from their childhood. I started to relax and think that maybe they had grown up since their earlier days of driving away Marcus's girlfriends. They seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me and making me feel included. Then the conversation took a subtle but unmistakable turn. Victoria started asking about my family background, where I went to school, what my parents did for work. When I explained that my father was a mechanic and my mother worked as a school secretary, their smiles became a little more forced. Isabella made a comment about how refreshing it was to meet someone so down-to-earth, but the way she said it made it clear that she didn't mean it as a compliment. Madison started asking about my previous relationships, whether I had ever been engaged before, what my long-term plans were. The questions felt increasingly invasive, but I tried to answer honestly because I wanted them to like me and accept me into their group. I told them about my dreams of expanding the flower shop, maybe opening additional locations, building something meaningful with my life. That's when they exchanged a look that I didn't understand at the time but would replay in my mind countless times over the following weeks. It was a look of decision, like they had just confirmed something they had already suspected. The rest of the lunch passed pleasantly enough, and they made plans to take me dress shopping the following weekend. But something had changed in the dynamic, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Their warmth felt more calculated, their questions more strategic. As I drove home that afternoon, I had a nagging feeling that I had failed some kind of test without even knowing I was being tested. I pushed the feeling aside and focused on how excited Marcus would be to hear that his friends were welcoming me into their circle. The dress shopping expedition was scheduled for Saturday morning at Bella Rosa Bridal, the most expensive bridal shop in the state. I was nervous about the cost, but Victoria assured me over the phone that they had already spoken with the shop owner and arranged for special pricing for the wedding party. She told me to just focus on finding something beautiful and not worry about the money. When I arrived at the shop, Victoria, Isabella, and Madison were already there, sipping champagne and laughing with the shop owner like they were old friends. They had already selected their own dresses, gorgeous designer gowns in complementary shades of dusty rose that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. They greeted me enthusiastically and immediately started pulling dresses off the racks for me to try. The first few dresses they selected were beautiful, but clearly outside my budget. When I quietly asked about prices, Victoria waved off my concerns and told me not to worry about it, that everything was being taken care of. I felt uncomfortable accepting such an expensive gift, but I didn't want to seem ungrateful or cause problems when they were being so generous. Then something strange started happening. Every dress I tried on, they found something wrong with it. This one made me look washed out. That one was unflattering for my figure. This color clashed with my skin tone. That style was too young for me, or too old, or too formal, or not formal enough. After 2 hours of trying on dozens of dresses, we hadn't found a single one that they approved of. I was starting to feel frustrated and self-conscious, wondering if maybe I just wasn't the type of person who looked good in formal wear. But the shop owner, who had been watching this process with increasing concern, finally spoke up. She quietly suggested that perhaps the issue wasn't with the dresses but with the fit, and maybe we should try a different size or style altogether. That's when Isabella made a comment that stopped my heart. She said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes, that maybe the problem was that I was trying to fit into a world where I didn't naturally belong. She said some people just weren't built for formal occasions, and there was nothing wrong with that, but maybe I should consider whether being a bridesmaid was the right role for me. Victoria quickly jumped in to smooth over the comment, saying that Isabella was just tired and didn't mean anything by it. But the damage was done. I could see in their faces that this entire shopping trip had been some kind of elaborate test, and I had failed it completely. They had never intended to help me find a dress. They had intended to make me feel so uncomfortable and out of place that I would remove myself from the wedding. The shop owner, clearly sensing the tension, suggested that maybe we should take a break and reconvene another day. But Madison had one more surprise for me. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos from the bachelorette party planning committee meeting I hadn't been invited to. They had planned an entire weekend in the Hamptons, complete with yacht parties, spa treatments, and dinners at restaurants I had never heard of but could tell were impossibly expensive. We thought it might be more comfortable for everyone, Victoria explained with false sweetness, if we kept the bachelorette party to people who really know each other well and have similar lifestyles. We wouldn't want anyone to feel out of place or uncomfortable. The message was crystal clear. I was being excluded from every meaningful part of the wedding celebration, and they were giving me the chance to bow out gracefully before things got more embarrassing for everyone involved. I left that bridal shop feeling completely devastated. These women had managed to make me question everything about myself, my relationship with Marcus, and my place in his world, without ever directly insulting me or being obviously cruel. They had been subtle and clever, death by 1,000 small cuts that left me bleeding but unable to point to any single wound. I drove home from that bridal shop feeling completely shattered, but I was determined not to let Marcus see how much his friends had affected me. When he called that evening to ask how the dress shopping went, I put on a brave voice and told him it had been fine, that we were still working on finding the perfect dress. I didn't have the heart to tell him that his childhood friends were systematically trying to push me out of his life. Over the next few days, the exclusion became more obvious and more painful. I would see photos on social media of Victoria, Isabella, and Madison having bridesmaid planning sessions that I wasn't invited to. They were choosing flowers, tasting cakes, and making decisions about every aspect of the wedding celebration while completely leaving me out of the process. When I called to ask about the next planning meeting, Victoria would always have an excuse about why it wasn't necessary for me to attend. The final blow came when Rebecca called me directly, sounding confused and apologetic. She explained that Victoria had told her there had been some kind of miscommunication about my role in the wedding. Apparently, they had decided that having an uneven number of bridesmaids would look awkward in photos, and they thought it would be better if I just attended as Marcus's guest instead of being part of the wedding party. I could hear the uncertainty in Rebecca's voice, like she knew something wasn't right but didn't want to cause drama so close to her wedding day. She offered to find some other way to include me, maybe doing a reading during the ceremony or helping with the guest book, but it was clear that Victoria and her friends had convinced her that removing me from the wedding party was the best solution for everyone involved. That night, I finally broke down and told Marcus everything. I explained about the lunch, the disastrous dress shopping trip, the exclusion from planning activities, and finally being removed from the wedding party altogether. I watched his face change as I told him the story, seeing anger and disappointment replace the confusion he had started with. Marcus was furious, but not just at his friends. He was angry at himself for putting me in that position, for thinking that he could control how they would react to me, for being naive enough to believe that they had changed since their college days. He wanted to call them immediately and confront them about their behavior, but I begged him not to. The wedding was only a week away, and I didn't want to be the reason for family drama or ruined friendships. Instead, I suggested that maybe this was a sign that we weren't ready to go public with our relationship yet. Maybe we needed more time to figure out how to handle the social pressures and expectations that came with his world. Marcus looked at me like I had suggested we give up on everything we had built together, and that's when I realized how differently we saw this situation. To me, this felt like confirmation of everything I had always feared about not being good enough for his world. But to Marcus, this felt like bullies trying to control his life and dictate who he could love. He saw their behavior as completely unacceptable, while I saw it as maybe inevitable. The difference in our perspectives created the first real crack in our relationship. We spent the week before the wedding in a strange kind of limbo. Marcus wanted to boycott the entire event in protest of how I had been treated, but I convinced him that would only make things worse for his cousin Rebecca, who had done nothing wrong. I agreed to attend the wedding as his date, and we decided to use the event as our official coming out to his family, even if his friends already knew about me and disapproved. The morning of the wedding, I put on the most beautiful dress I owned, a navy blue cocktail dress that I had splurged on for my birthday the year before. It wasn't a designer gown like the bridesmaids would be wearing, but it made me feel confident and elegant. Marcus picked me up in his car, looking devastatingly handsome in his groomsman tuxedo, and told me at least 20 times how proud he was to finally be able to introduce me to everyone as his girlfriend. We arrived at Grandview Manor an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The venue was absolutely stunning, with white roses and baby's breath arranged in elegant displays throughout the garden area. Everything looked perfect and romantic, exactly the kind of wedding that would be featured in magazines. Marcus immediately started introducing me to his relatives, and I was overwhelmed by how warm and welcoming everyone was. His Aunt Margaret hugged me like we were old friends and told me she had been wondering when Marcus was finally going to bring someone special to a family event. His Uncle David shook my hand and said he could tell, just by looking at Marcus, that he was happier than he had been in years. His younger cousins wanted to know everything about how we met and how long we had been together. For the first time in months, I started to relax and enjoy myself. These were good people who cared about Marcus and wanted him to be happy. They didn't care that I worked in a flower shop or that my dress wasn't from a designer boutique. They cared that I made Marcus smile and that I was clearly devoted to him. But then I saw Victoria, Isabella, and Madison emerging from the bridal suite, and the atmosphere changed completely. They were stunning in their matching dusty rose gowns, their hair and makeup professionally done, looking like they belonged on the cover of a bridal magazine. When they spotted Marcus and me talking with his family, their smiles became tight and artificial. Victoria walked over to us with her arms outstretched, acting like we were the best of friends. She complimented my dress with the kind of enthusiasm that somehow made it sound like an insult, and told Marcus how wonderful it was that he had found someone so sweet and down to earth. The emphasis she put on those last 3 words made it clear that she meant something entirely different. Isabella and Madison flanked her like backup singers, nodding along and making comments about how refreshing it was to meet someone so genuine and unpretentious. Every compliment felt like a carefully aimed arrow designed to highlight all the ways I was different from them and inferior to their standards. Marcus was getting increasingly tense beside me, and I could see him preparing to say something that would definitely cause a scene. Before he could speak, Rebecca appeared in her wedding dress, looking absolutely radiant and nervous in the way that all brides look on their wedding day. She hugged me warmly and thanked me for being there, then pulled Marcus aside to discuss some last-minute groomsman duties. That left me standing with Victoria, Isabella, and Madison for the first time since our disastrous dress shopping experience. The mask of fake friendliness dropped immediately. Victoria stepped closer to me and lowered her voice so that the other wedding guests couldn't hear what she was saying. She told me that she hoped I understood that today was about celebrating love and happiness, and she trusted that I wouldn't do anything to draw attention to myself or create any drama that might detract from Rebecca's special day. Isabella added that she hoped I realized how generous they had been by not making a bigger issue out of the bridesmaid situation, and that they expected me to be grateful for their discretion. Madison finished by saying that she was sure I was a perfectly nice girl, but some people were just meant to stay in the background, and there was nothing wrong with knowing your place in the world. They delivered these comments with smiles on their faces, speaking in sweet tones that would sound perfectly pleasant to anyone who might overhear. But their message was unmistakable. They were giving me one final warning to stay quiet, stay small, and not cause any problems for their carefully orchestrated social dynamic. I felt that familiar crushing sensation in my chest, the same feeling I had experienced at the bridal shop and during our awful lunch. These women had a gift for making me feel ashamed of who I was without ever saying anything that I could point to as openly cruel or unacceptable. They were masters of subtle psychological warfare. But something was different this time. Maybe it was seeing how genuinely Marcus's family had welcomed me, or maybe it was the realization that I was tired of apologizing for my existence. Instead of shrinking away from their intimidation tactics, I found myself standing a little straighter and meeting Victoria's eyes directly. I told her that I understood perfectly what kind of day this was supposed to be, and I assured her that I would do nothing to detract from Rebecca's happiness. But I also told her that I wasn't going anywhere, and if she had issues with Marcus's choices, she should take them up with him directly instead of trying to bully me into disappearing. The three of them looked genuinely shocked that I had pushed back against their subtle threats. They were used to people either fighting back openly, which would make them look like the victims, or backing down completely, which would give them the victory they wanted. My calm but firm response seemed to confuse them, and for a moment they didn't know how to react. Before they could regroup and launch another attack, the wedding coordinator appeared and started gathering the bridal party for pre-ceremony photos. Victoria, Isabella, and Madison had to put their fake smiles back on and focus on their bridesmaid duties, but I could see them exchanging meaningful glances and knew that they weren't done with me yet. The ceremony itself was absolutely beautiful. Rebecca and her groom exchanged vows in the garden under an archway covered with white roses, and there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Marcus looked incredibly handsome in his groomsman tuxedo, and I felt so proud watching him fulfill his duties with grace and dignity. This was the man I loved, and seeing him surrounded by family members who adored him reminded me why I had been willing to hide our relationship for so long. During the cocktail hour after the ceremony, Marcus barely left my side. He introduced me to everyone we hadn't met earlier, including several family friends and business associates who were clearly important connections in his professional world. I was amazed by how easily he integrated me into conversations, how naturally he included me in discussions about business deals and social events. One of his father's business partners spent 15 minutes talking to me about my flower shop, asking thoughtful questions about seasonal arrangements, and offering to connect me with event planners who might be interested in working with a small local business. A family friend who owned several restaurants wanted to know if I would be interested in providing floral arrangements for special occasions. For the first time since this whole wedding experience began, I felt like I was being seen as a complete person with my own talents and ambitions, not just as Marcus's inappropriate girlfriend who didn't belong in their world. These people were treating me like I had something valuable to offer, and it was incredibly empowering. But Victoria, Isabella, and Madison were watching everything from across the cocktail area, and I could see them becoming increasingly agitated as the evening progressed. They had expected me to fade into the background and prove their point about not belonging, but instead I was confidently engaging with everyone and clearly making a positive impression on Marcus's family and friends. During dinner, Marcus and I were seated at a table with several of his cousins and their spouses, all of whom were fun and welcoming people who made me feel completely included in their conversations. We talked about travel experiences, shared funny stories about our jobs, and discussed our favorite restaurants and movies. It was exactly the kind of evening I had dreamed about when Marcus first suggested bringing me to this wedding. But I could see Victoria, Isabella, and Madison at the bridal party table, their heads together in what looked like increasingly urgent whispered conversations. Every few minutes, one of them would glance in my direction, and their expressions were becoming more and more hostile, as they realized that their plan to make me uncomfortable and out of place was completely backfiring. The real confrontation came during the reception dancing. Marcus and I had been on the dance floor for several songs, laughing and enjoying ourselves, when Victoria appeared beside us with a bright smile and tapped Marcus on the shoulder. She said she needed to borrow him for just a minute to discuss something important about a wedding gift presentation. Marcus looked reluctant to leave me, but I encouraged him to go handle whatever needed to be handled. I figured I would get a drink and maybe chat with some of the other guests until he returned. But as soon as Marcus walked away with Victoria, Isabella and Madison appeared on either side of me like they had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. They suggested we step outside onto the terrace for some fresh air, and something about their tone made it clear that this wasn't really a suggestion. The three of us walked out onto the stone terrace that overlooked the estate's gardens, and suddenly I found myself alone with them for the first time since our confrontation before the ceremony. This time, they didn't bother with fake smiles or sweet voices. Victoria told me bluntly that they had tried to handle this situation gracefully, but I had forced their hand by refusing to take the hint and remove myself from Marcus's life. Isabella said they had been protecting Marcus from inappropriate relationships for years, and they weren't going to stop now just because I was more stubborn than his previous girlfriends. Madison delivered the final blow by telling me that they had already spoken to Marcus's parents about their concerns regarding our relationship. They had expressed worry about how a serious relationship with someone from such a different background might affect Marcus's business reputation and social standing. They had suggested that his parents might want to have a conversation with him about making sure he wasn't making decisions based on temporary infatuation that he might regret later. They explained that Marcus's parents were too polite to say anything directly, but they were clearly concerned about the long-term implications of their son getting too serious with someone who couldn't contribute to his social or professional advancement. The three of them were just looking out for everyone's best interests by encouraging me to end the relationship before it became more complicated. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. The idea that Marcus's parents, who had been so warm and welcoming to me all evening, were actually worried about my influence on their son was devastating. But more than that, I was furious that these women thought they had the right to interfere in our relationship and speak for people who hadn't asked them to get involved. For 3 years, I had been hiding and making myself small to avoid exactly this kind of confrontation. I had convinced myself that staying quiet and not causing problems would protect my relationship with Marcus. But standing there on that terrace, listening to these women tell me that I wasn't good enough for the man I loved, I finally understood that no amount of hiding was ever going to be enough for people who had already decided I didn't belong. That's when everything changed. Instead of defending myself or trying to prove my worth to them, I asked them a simple question. I asked them why they thought Marcus's happiness was less important than their approval. I asked them why they believed they had the right to choose who he could love and who he couldn't. And I asked them what they thought gave them the authority to speak for his parents or anyone else in his family. The three of them started talking over each other, making excuses about friendship and loyalty, and looking out for people they cared about. But I could see in their faces that they had never been asked to justify their behavior before. Everyone had always either fought back emotionally, which made them look reasonable in comparison, or given in to their pressure, which validated their methods. My calm questions seemed to unnerve them more than any angry response could have. They couldn't paint me as dramatic or unreasonable, and they couldn't claim victory over someone who wasn't backing down. For the first time in our entire acquaintance, I felt like I had the upper hand in our dynamic. That's when Marcus appeared in the doorway leading to the terrace. He had clearly been looking for me, and from the expression on his face he had heard at least part of our conversation. He looked at the four of us standing there in tense silence, and I could see him putting together what had happened. But before he could say anything, I walked over to him and took his hand. I told him that I had just been having a very interesting conversation with his friends, and I thought it was time for all of us to have an honest discussion about respect, boundaries, and what it really means to care about someone's happiness. The look on Victoria, Isabella, and Madison's faces was priceless. They realized that instead of successfully driving me away, they had pushed me to a point where I was no longer willing to be quiet about their behavior. Their subtle campaign of psychological warfare was about to become a very public conversation about their treatment of me, and they had no idea how to handle that possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.